Welcome to the Fawkes Report. Welcome. The only internet political commentary show, of course. I really like that. Named after a 16th century Catholic radical. Legend tried to blow up Parliament. When that is what it said. This is pretty cool music I'm listening to. Amid the Ruins Culture War. It's called Orthowave. Orthodox Christians on the internet making some based tunes to get us into the mood to do some right-wingy kind of things. I think that's pretty chill, pretty cool. Pretty darn good music if you ask me. So yeah, today on the Fawkes Report, we've had some good developments in the world. I'm trying to keep on top of things, trying to pay as much attention as I can to the events that occur in the world as we know it. And so there have been some important things going on today. So one thing that happened is apparently the Chinese, they sent some kind of rocket up into space, as they're apt to do, as they're often do, is they send things into space. And apparently it's going to be crashing down to Earth here pretty soon. It's just going to come falling out of the sky. And I guess it's going to hit somebody on the head. I guess that's the fear. The Chinese rocket falling to Earth uncontrolled is one of 11 similar missions scheduled over the next 2 years. The Chinese rocket falling to Earth is one of 11 in China's plan to build a space station. 2 of the launches involve the same type of rocket, now an uncontrolled descent. Last time that type of rocket came back to Earth, debris is thought to have fallen on 2 villages in Africa. Yeah, so people complain about the United States doing a lot of pollution. China, they're the only ones landing, space rockets on Africans in Africa. So take that as you will. But so what they're trying to do is the big issue here is they're trying to build, I guess, their own state-owned China space station. And I guess it's going to compete with the International Space Station. And the reason why that's important is that what it's starting to show is that we're starting to see a breakup in sort of this whole, U.S.-led world order. And they're going to start saying, hey, us Chinese, we can have our own thing too. And I guess the Russians will do their thing. Also, we'll have 2 or 3 different countries, 2 or 3 different space stations. So it shows that we're moving into a new era. We're moving into an era where we'll have great powers again competing. It's an inevitable thing. U.S. empire, imperialism, or whatever you want to call it. Our imperium, whether you think it's good or bad, I think it's a mixed bag. But it's receding. And the Chinese empire is expanding. As is, the Russian Empire, not as much. I think that they have a lot of problems because both of them have population issues. So recently we saw that China's population is set to decline. Or it just did decline. So China set to report first population decline in 5 decades. Officials are preparing to respond to census data that should have been released weeks ago. So this is one of those sites that likes to censor everything if you don't do what they want. And I'm not really interested in that. But what we're seeing is China's economy is starting to shrink. So it's a mixed bag. So on the one hand, yes, their economy is growing really well. Yes, they're starting to make spaceships. Yes, they're starting to do all this crazy stuff. But they still have population issues from their one-child policy, all that stuff they used to do. So it's a mixed bag. But do be on the lookout because a lot of these countries are starting to come up. So it shows that we as Americans... Now, look, I'm a non-interventionist. I'm not a full non-interventionist, but I'm an anti-war guy most of the time. But I'm not an anti-military guy. I, for a long, long time, have said you need to be for less war, but for a greater military. Because, if we fight a war, you want to win that war. You want to stay out of war if you can. But if you must have a war, if you absolutely must, you must do it the correct way. You can't have the fake butter that people make. I don't even remember what the fake butter is called. You have to have the real butter. And it reminds me, there was a British commercial I saw. It was something like, we know that you Americans like to drink your tea cold. We don't understand it. Us British only drink it hot. But if you must have this certain brand of tea. It was a commercial for a brand of tea. I'm not sure where I was going with that. But what I'm trying to say here is, if we must have an army, if we must have a military, let's make it a damn kick-ass one. If we must have a war, anyways, if we must have a war, we're obviously going to have it. If we're going to have a war, let's make it a kick-ass one, because we have to deal with people like China. So, us sitting here thinking we're the best thing ever, it's not going to last forever. So just be cognizant of that. But some other news, NASA, they're doing things that matter, as always. And so I guess NASA, they detected emissions coming from Venus. So I guess there might be aliens on Venus now. That might be what's going on, right? Right? No, not at all. Actually, it just means their atmosphere is thinning. And that's really important. I really needed to know that Venus has a thinning atmosphere. That's so important. Such an important use of our tax dollars. It's just great. And I guess it reminds me of a quote from a man. Industry. Good Lord, I do not need to reinstall Windows. Industry will lead us into space. I believe it was Robert A. Heinlein. Yeah, so I can't find the exact quote, but he very famously said that he believed what would bring us to space would be industry, industrial innovation, the innovations of the free market. And I'm going to say right now, I've become very skeptical of the marketplace as a person on the right recently, just because I've seen the oppression that's come from big tech and a lot of these, liberal woke corporations, and how big and popular that's become. And I've seen how we on the right get consistently screwed over by the people that we spend so much time protecting, these big companies and corporations. But what I am telling you, though, is that you can't sell out on capitalism entirely. You have to recognize its strength and its power. And one of the things it can do is, I think, it will have to eventually bring us into space. Because NASA is not going to do it. The only time the government does something well is if it's at war. If it needs to fight to survive. And when we went to the moon, the reason we got to the moon as quickly as we did is because we were competing with the Soviet Union to get to the moon. And so we needed something like a war to win. Something of pride. We needed to attach ourselves to that pride. And we did, and we won, and it was great. But NASA, they don't have that anymore. So maybe, just maybe, China building the space station will inspire NASA to get better at sending stuff in space. Maybe that will be one thing. But I personally believe, I have a big belief in Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. They're the ones that we should really be thinking about relying on to take us into space for the time being, for the near future. That would be my belief. So I'm going to be a jerk here and say that there's a time when you get just a little bit too much free money. It's just like Obama said, right? Obama, he said, at a certain point, you've made enough money. Barack Obama. It's kind of like what he said, right?
So what's working fine for them wasn't working for ordinary Americans. And we've learned that clearly. It doesn't work out fine for the country. It's got to change. Now, what we're doing, I want to be clear. We're not trying to push financial reform because we begrudge success that's fairly earned. I mean, I do think at a certain point you've made enough money.
Yeah, so at a certain point, we've made enough money in stimulus checks. So you've been giving out 4 of these. I don't feel like we need another one. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we do. Maybe everybody would love that. But personally, I feel like I've gotten enough free money. I feel like I'm good. And I know that we're going to have to pay this stuff back eventually. Now, unless we want to go full Andrew Yang here and say, you know what? Let's make this permanent and let's just give people endless amounts of money and put a certain tax on whatever to pay for it forever. And that's one thing. But, that's not what we're going to do. We're just, we're not printing it, but we're borrowing this money. We're just shipping it out. There's nothing, we're not paying for this, okay? We're going to have to pay for it later. And we added a good bit of debt with what we've already done, and I thought it was sufficient. And I think the economy is starting to do a lot better. So I don't feel like we need a 4th stimulus check. So I just feel like that's a little crazy. And my libertarian instincts, they're starting to kick in a more righteous way, not in a self-interested way. I'm not following my own rational self-interest here. I'm just saying for an altruist, I'm not Ayn Rand, I'm being altruistic here and saying that I don't need another stimulus check. I feel like we've had enough. That's enough stimulus checks. We're good. It's enough rum. I've had enough rum. As the great Captain Jack Sparrow would say, why is the rum gone? It's very relevant to what I'm talking about. But, as what I would say, yes, I feel like there's a certain point. I mean, I got to tell you, I'm not the libertarian that I once was. I used to be quite the market fundamentalist, as it were. Quite the person that would say that there is no role for government at all in the economy. Big follower of Ron Paul and the Ludwig von Mises Institute for a period of time in my life. But I think I saw that movement just did not work. Eventually it was infested by the SJWs and the liberals and those that despise tradition and those that despise, everything. And eventually they just cave. And then you find that they actually want to be more liberal than conservative. And it just doesn't work anymore. You find that libertarianism is just not its own self-sustaining thing. It swings whatever direction the wind blows. It swings in the direction of whatever they think is more popular and marketable at the time. And it just didn't work. It doesn't work as a system. And I've moved on to other things. And I can't say that I'm purely ideological either. I would say I'm mostly a conservative or a right-winger, a person of the right. But I wouldn't define myself as any particular variant of it, per se. So there's a little bit of libertarian, a little bit of paleo-conservative, a little bit of standard conservative, just everything just kind of meshed together. And just to what works. And I have my faith in the Lord, and that's there as well, and that makes me strong, which is great. But finally, we can talk about a big thing. And that is the French military. And France, in general, in my opinion, is starting to lean to the right and become a major hope for the revival of the right in Europe. French military is becoming more diverse. It's also leaning further right. And this is a big development. And so kind of what they're saying here is that traditionalism is on the rise in the military. And the government has struggled to integrate its efforts, and so basically what they're saying is that recent terrorist attacks have nudged public discourse further towards traditional conservative values. Last month, a police officer was killed in the town of Rambouillet, I guess, in a terrorist attack. And the murder of a junior high teacher in Paris suburb by Islamic terrorists last October set off a series of public debates and government propositions to tighten security and stamp out separatism. Emmanuel Macron is increasingly positioning himself as a law and order president. Yeah, so basically what they're saying is that Emmanuel Macron is having to shift to the right in order to maintain himself. And he's trying to be Mr. Law and Order, SVU, you know, Mr. Trump, Law and Order. But everybody knows that that's a sham. That's not who he is. And the polls are suggesting that around 40% of the French military votes for the Front National, now named the National Rally Party, significantly more than the national population. So the French far right, Marine Le Pen, now has the support of a large percentage of the French military for the first time in a long time. That's a major shift in politics. And it goes back to a big development that happened, and that was, the French generals of the French military came out and they wrote a letter warning of civil war. Head of France's armed forces has pledged to punish 20 generals and 18 French active soldiers, including officers, who signed an open letter warning of the risks of impending civil war at the hands of fanatics and Islamists, saying they have breached their duty of reserve. So what they're saying is the military is really starting to wake up in France to the fact that these globalist liberal policies of their establishment have completely destroyed their society, and they need to return to traditional roots of French nationalism and Christianity to stave off the tide of Islamization that's destroying their country. And of course, we're supposed to hate that. That's terrible. How dare these French generals recognize the plight of their own country and try to seek to restore the France of old? How dare they? And because of that, they're being threatened with forced retirement, to be kicked out of the military and be shunned for having the gall, Charles de Gaulle, to say that they fear for their country. That is a sham. But I'll tell you one thing. There's one guy, people talk a lot about Marine Le Pen and Marine Le Pen. I love Marine Le Pen, not as big a fan as Marine Le Pen. But the person that I thought would have been the savior of France was a man named Francois Fillon. He was the head of the Republicans, and he was a Catholic, and he was a conservative, and he wanted to stay out of foreign wars, and he wanted to do great things to improve the well-being of French. And of course, he was targeted in what was probably a politically motivated accusation of embezzling funds. And last year, actually, he and his wife were arrested for fake jobs or whatever the hell it was. Maybe he's guilty, maybe he's not, I don't know. But they're arrested, and they're sentenced to 5 years in prison, both of them. And I guess they're trying to appeal the decision. But my point is that this was a major failure of France, because this guy was the front runner. And he had a really excellent shot to become president of France. But he was targeted by the scandal right in the middle of the campaign. And he was defeated. We got Mr. Emmanuel Macron, the biggest loser on the planet, who nobody should ever tolerate for anything. But that's it. And unfortunately, that's where France is right now. France polls. I mean, you could see where it was. It was very close between those three. And you could see the makeup of the country. And you could see how it's changing. And that's an outdated one. But the reality is things in France are changing a lot. And maybe they can wake up and he can actually be a hope. I mean, they could have hope for that country. Maybe Le Pen can win one of the Le Pens. I prefer Marine Le Pen, but whichever one can knock out Francois Fillon. Emmanuel Macron, that guy. That would be an excellent thing. And really, this is something we have to really recognize, and that is our traditional cultures, societies of nations have been torn down by the fruits of liberalism, both classical and modern. And that maybe it's time to try a little bit of traditionalism, a little bit of conservatism. It's a little bit long overdue that we had a little bit of a revival of that old kind of conservative, the old kind of right that people just don't remember when the king knew what was going on. Stuff like that, you know? Sometimes you just have to blow up Parliament, is what I'm trying to say here. Sometimes you just do. But that's the culture war. And be ready for it. It's not just ortho, it's also the Fawkes Report. It's also good old Roman Catholics fighting the good fight. Let's all stick together and fight the good fight. That's all I'm saying. Let's just remember our nation, culture, heritage, faith, and God Himself will ultimately